There it is.
Good evening. This is Bill Ohm for the People's View. It's February 5th, 2020. With me are my fellow state reps, Carl Seidel, Kevin Scully, and Barbara Griffin. One of the interesting topics we were talking about is the Performing Arts Center, the old Alex Shoe store in downtown Nashua, and what's happening with that, what should be happening, what might be happening. And Carl, do you want to kick that off? What we think is going on here?
Well, the center has been argued about quite a bit, and they originally had a $4 million fund that they had to develop before they moved ahead, but the aldermen let that go. And now they're approving a loan and a couple other pieces of financing, and stuff is supposed to get moving within the 2 years.
I remember that was controversial, Carl, because it was a lot of money to refurbish
right.
that building, and because it was a lot of money, they wanted to make sure that there was enough private support for this. Mm-hmm. And as I recall, they had to raise at least $4 million in order to be able to bond the rest of it and get it moving.
Mm-hmm. That's and right now they never. Well, first of all, I understand they never collected more than $1 million, and that wasn't collecting money; it was collecting in statements of that they
pledges.
Donated. Yeah, pledges. So, what are we going to do? Well, we'll find out what the aldermen are going to do. I don't know if we get them to talk about it at all, because I did that when they did the last approval for $190 million for this school and everything, and they never discussed anything. I tried to ask if they had compared that to the ongoing promises that we've made with the money coming in, and I was told I'd get a copy of the way they projected it. I haven't seen it yet.
Well, it
What do you think,
bothers
Kevin?
me because, well, as you said, there was a $4 million
Pledge.
goal that
Yeah.
it was more than a goal, because they could not go ahead
That's
unless
right.
they had to hit that $4 million. And I have to tell you, I'm not a professional politician, but I've been in politics long enough to know that if they raised that $4 million, you would have been hearing about it. Instead, they have locked this down. It's ultra secret as to how much they've raised, which says to me they've raised next to nothing. Now, there has been a recent announcement that I think Bank of America was going to kick in $250,000. So I'm assuming it's $250,000 plus one, whatever. But I tell you what really bothers me about this whole thing was when that was put on the ballot, it was voted on, and that was an integral part of the conditions to go forward with spending this money. And it passed 51 to 49. And this was in a municipal election with reduced turnout. So it just squeaked by, but it was with these safeguards put in place.
So before the public money would be spent, we'd have to raise this private money.
Yes. Yes. Now, from my perspective, if it was a good idea, the private sector would do it. You wouldn't need any prompting from government. I think they've proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt from my perspective, it's a bad idea, because they promised to leverage 4 public dollars for every private dollar that was spent, and they still couldn't raise the money. And now that we know that there is no private interest at all, now they want to change the deal again after the fact, remove any tie between private fundraising and spending. Ain't 15.5 million anymore. We're hearing this over 20 now.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to charge ahead and do this. The public be damned. So I will tell you, I've been online in social media and Facebook, and my suggestion was simply this. If you want to do this right, if you're going to fundamentally change the deal after the fact, the right thing to do, the moral thing to do, is to put it back on the ballot. Put the new deal on the table and let people vote on that. That's the right way to do this. What they're intending to do right now, I consider to be the moral equivalent of bait and switch.
Well, they're certainly getting all sorts of little things, like they got some kind of a tax refund. They're really going out there scraping to show that they have some money, but it's not enough.
Yeah, but tax credits, again, what you're basically saying, you give me $1 and you don't have to spend $1 over there.
Right.
What they're robbing out of their own pants
That's
pockets
right.
to do that. So again, it's showing there is no private sector interest in this.
I think one reason might be there's other venues that have nice facilities for these kind of performing
right.
arts. I know, Barbara, up in Manchester, there's the SNU Arena, the huge venue. There's the Palace Theater. There's other venues. What do you think about those competitions for something like Alex?
Well, I think that downtown Main Street here in Nashua probably plays to a slightly different market than up north. I mean, I have been down here to art things over at the center here off of Main Street, but I think you're probably playing to a different market. I think what's interesting is what Kevin was talking about. Is if it was that specific on the ballot, I question whether the aldermen have the authority to go ahead with what you're talking about. The bottom line, though, is as in all things, people get away with what they can get away with until somebody stops them, and so. If indeed, as you're saying, the aldermen are changing the deal that the voters have voted on without putting it back on the ballot, it's going to take some voters to say, hey, you can't do that, and probably bring them to court. I can tell you it happens in other towns. It might be to do with a decision on holding an election or not holding an election, or spending money on a contract or not spending it. People go to court and file in, it would be in the Superior Court, and say, I need you to stop this board, elected board, from doing something because they're not authorized to do it. And sometimes citizens are successful in getting courts to agree with them, and sometimes they're not. But the bottom line is that your aldermen are probably going to do what they want to do unless somebody says no.
Yeah, they did vote on that already, and they passed it, saying that we don't have to do this. The
Well,
aldermen
I mean,
did that, so I don't know.
I thought
if
the
you-
public hearing was tomorrow night.
There's a public hearing for, what was it? For getting the bonds for it now. You
Oh,
couldn't
I
get
see.
the
Okay.
bonds without this other thing, so a month ago, they passed a resolution.
To
where
waive
they
the
got-
contingency of the
That's
$4
right.
million.
And so that now tomorrow is they're going to do the bonding.
Oh, so it's a done deal then.
Well,
I mean-
I think so, the way they go through, because they vote, 15-0.
Well, Bob, perhaps we do need to take them to court, although I'll tell you, the last time we tried doing this, we lost our spending cap.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
A little gun shy.
Yeah.
But they still really haven't had a discussion, too, about the Elm Street School facility, because that has a big theater. It's bigger than the one we'll be getting out of the building on Main Street. And you have to spend some to upgrade it maybe a little bit, but that's a good one. And you're going to tear down that school in 2 years to save that.
Right.
I go see the Nashua Symphony there all the time. It's a wonderful venue, and I
Right.
think the acoustics are great.
Yeah, they are.
So they were talking about with some minor modifications, they could take that
They could
existing,
do it.
a beautiful existing structure.
And if you tear down the school, you can put parking lot there for the people to park. Or what I think in the long term, if they're looking at a number of different things to enhance the city, they got to run a little free bus
Shuttle?
system to move the people between the parking areas and the things, because they're going to do things on the river. They want to do things out on Merrimack. They have all these grand ideas of how they're going to make this a much more enticing place to go to.
So I wonder, Carl, you were in transportation. We always had a 10-year plan for the long-term vision. Does the city have any kind of a plan like this for the development?
No, they don't have a plan like the 10-year plan, that's for sure, and they have 10-year plans for other public things, not
Yeah, that was a
anything. This
transportation
was,
plan. But in general, do we have a vision for how the city would like to be? And do we have pieces that could get us from there to there from here?
they do not do the planning the same way that the state does planning. The school enhancement and the new school that they're building out there on the western, southwestern
Yeah, over the
portion.
Cherrywood section, where
Right,
the
the
neighbors are
Cherrywood
pretty
section.
unhappy about that.
But they go through, they have one person leading it, they have so-called meetings, and they don't publicize the results of those meetings. So they claim that they have the support of the people because nobody objected to it.
We have a
And,
secret meeting, but nobody objected.
Well, it's not exactly a secret meeting.
Right.
They don't publicize it very
No.
well.
Now, was
and
it
they get
actually-
about a dozen people.
Was it true that they actually had not secured egress rights to the property that they were going to build the school on before they voted the bond to build the school?
Yeah.
Now, wouldn't you love to be the person who they have to negotiate with to get the egress rights to that property?
That's not quite true. That's
All
not
right,
quite
so
true.
what happened?
I actually pull up the maps because I had a neighbor who was complaining about this weeded area right near where she lives and how it's kind of overgrown and it's kind of blocking sight lines on traffic with kids playing in the street. So I pull out the maps, the GIS maps, and to find out who owns this property. Well, guess who owns this chunk of land that's all overgrown with weeds?
That's the city.
The city.
Yeah.
And where does that property go?
I don't know.
It goes
exact-
from the Cherrywood into the big section where they want to build a high school.
Yeah.
So they do have access through the busy streets of the Cherrywood section
Right.
and not the obvious
Right.
preferred entrance at Buck Meadow on the backside. So that might have been the loophole that they used to say, well, we do have access. Everybody's going to hate it because we're not have school buses down our little nice subdivision of small streets. But I think that's probably what they had
Right.
wrangled to get the thing moving.
They don't plan very well.
No.
I can tell you from the experience I've had on the rail committee that what they're doing was, I don't know. I don't know how they get it through anybody, but somehow they get the money to do things. I wouldn't agree with any way they justify.
Yeah. Well, that brings up my public service announcement.
Okay.
So if you're concerned about what's going on with the city, if you're concerned about what's going on at the state, I've got a mug that says I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore, from the movie Network. And if you're unhappy about what's going on in the city, then you can do like the four of us have done, which is to run for office. And instead of being on the table, we're going to be at the table and try to settle these controversial issues in a way that's more beneficial to our constituents. So I hope you folks who are listening to this think about running for office. You can call any one of us, Carl Seidel, Kevin Scully, Barbara Griffin, myself, Bill Ohm, and we'll tell you a little bit about what it's like to be a state rep,
Right.
in some cases, a city rep.
We even run little classes on it
We
sometimes.
do. We're
so
classy
give you-
people.
But it's not. It is a lot of fun to do it in New Hampshire. It's not done like it is in other states.
I sit down and I've really actually thought about this, and I'm actually kind of amazed. I had no idea with this adventure, this decision to run for state office was going to take me. But I have met some of the most interesting people in my life, right here, and I get to call them friends now. I think I'm so happy I did it.
Well, as a
So-
first-time legislator too, you did a good job. You just fell right in. You felt comfortable, and you got a couple of things done that people didn't even think you would be successful. So,
Well, I had the help of some very good legislators.
well, that's what you do get. Yeah,
Yeah.
you do get. I can say that the Public Works Committee that I was on was very, very good. Although we had some discussions, but we really did things more as a group there in the Public Works.
I point out, as a large legislature, there's somebody in that building who's really the expert on this topic. Just ask around and find out who really knows about this thing, and you can work from there.
But not only on the state level, we need it in the local level
Yeah.
too. We need it for the aldermen. I don't think when you have any group that's all of one thought process, I don't even know if that's the right word, but they just go along and they do everything
Yeah.
that the leader tells them.
Yeah.
And you want some discussion there. You want it on the Board of Aldermen, you want it on the Board of Education.
Yeah, and we debate among ourselves and compromise and figure out what's the best thing we can do for the folks. That's fun.
So please consider it.
And go to NashuaGOP.org if you want to learn a little bit more what we're doing, what meetings we have. It's usually on either the second or third Thursday of the month, and all the events are listed on there too. And actually, copies of these People Views systems are right on our website.
It's all a really interesting process, and when you're on the alderman or a local board, there's one-time commitment, and that I find usually is a little more work-friendly for people when you're on a local board. If you run for one of the city offices, all these fine gentlemen I've served with at the legislature, that's sort of a different time commitment. But what was so interesting to me was I always thought of New Hampshire as being part-time legislature. Well, the reality is every state is part-time. Everybody's pretty much on the same schedule. You have you do session work on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Monday and Fridays are off. On a national level, that's sort of your travel day. At the local level, it's sort of the get your local business done. And everybody's off during the summer, and then it's a light load in the fall. So if you're thinking about running, there is a rhythm to the schedule. It's not full time. It is during the day, but people can manage it with jobs. I know I was self-employed, so I sort of was able to juggle a little more or do things at night. Today I was up in session and ran and did something at lunchtime. Came back and was able to finish what was going on. So I wasn't in session, I was in committee meetings. But if people are interested, they can talk to all of you or me and figure out a way to make it work.
And who can't use another $100 a year?
That's right. That's your pay, $100 a year.
Plus mileage.
That's right.
And it's taxable. You'll get a W-2 on that.
Well, there are ways to do it so it's not taxable. At least if you're from Nashua, you get some mileage. I remember years ago being in line with somebody who was from Concord, and she said, oh, yeah, I did that state rep thing too. She said, I finally couldn't take it anymore. The mileage didn't even pay for lunch.
We talked a little bit about serving in the State House, Barbara. So you've been up in Concord today, as you mentioned.
Yep.
And I understand there's always some controversial bills going on. And I think there was a gun bill that was pretty controversial. Is there anything you'd like to talk about?
Well, there are lots of gun bills. Gun bills are always controversial in New Hampshire. There are a lot of people here who think it is a strong right to bear arms, Second Amendment state, and there are other people who are very, I need to say, anti-gun liberties. They think they should really be constrained, and there is a lot of money coming into this state from lobby groups to support that, what I would say, anti-constitutional gun position. Today we heard sort of an interesting bill that would take away the immunity that's currently on the books for manufacturers of guns and sellers of guns in regards to use of a gun that goes badly, that no one as a gun owner wants to ever happen to them. So by taking away the immunity that's afforded to them expressly in statute, we heard testimony from a lot of employers and gun manufacturers that they would not be able to afford their business. We listened to one gentleman who said he pays $14,000 a year in insurance for what is not a big operation. And if they took away that immunity, he'd be out of business and moving to another state.
Don't we have a parallel with this, like with automobiles?
Exactly. It was actually pointed out by someone who spoke at one of the hearings that you could have 3 DUIs and not have had your license suspended for whatever reason at the particular time you go to buy a car, go out, get behind the wheel, and go in and smash into a crowd of people, and no one would ever think of liability against the car manufacturer for that. But when it's a gun, it is. And I need to tell, as an attorney, I think attorneys have helped fuel that. I actually happen to have a first cousin who was a victim many years ago now in the Long Island Expressway train shooting.
Oh, yes, I remember that.
And she was one of the persons shot in that, and actually later testified at the trial that ended in the conviction. And she was contacted relentlessly by lawyers after that event about joining a lawsuit against the gun manufacturers. And she said, no, 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 no. And eventually she said, okay, put my name on it. So it's not a new issue, this issue of a manufacturer liability for a product. We see it in drug litigation now and other things. But I think here in New Hampshire, from our perspective, given the laws that have been on the books for many years without much of an incident, I'm certainly hoping that the bill goes nowhere.
Right. Do you know of any state that has let that go through?
I have to say at this point I haven't researched it, so I'm not sure. We certainly didn't hear anything about it
I
today.
didn't think you would have then.
Well, the thing that bothers me, and it was drilled into my head as a freshman legislature tour, was what is the demonstrated need?
Right.
And really, at the end of the day, we are the third safest state in the union. We've got a gun death rate that's lower than Canada, and yet these people continue to relentlessly pound away at what I would say are the good, legal folks who are obeying the law. And that's the one thing that people just seem to keep forgetting, is that the good folks, you don't need to restrict them. The bad folks aren't going to pay any attention. So at the end of the day, I think this is yet another overreach and totally unnecessary thing to do.
Point out, Kevin, these folks are pounding away. I'm kind of curious as who these folks are. Is this the Michael Bloomberg, New York City crew that's bringing money into New Hampshire to pursue their agenda in our state?
I would say absolutely yes, in terms of the funding too. Interesting too, it looked like in this last election cycle, Michael Bloomberg gave $2,500 to our mayor. So I'm wondering what that was all about. Maybe it's just to kind of grease the wheels for him to come in and be a presidential candidate.
There's a little history there because the mayor has signed up for Bloomberg's Mayors Against Guns program a few years back.
Okay.
So we can look at probably something at City Hall that's not going to be gun-friendly coming up.
I see.
But it brings up the general topic about outside influence on New Hampshire's way of life. And we see this quite a bit with the presidential campaigns, with various special interest groups. Tom Steyer from California with the Green New Deal, et cetera, trying to pursue his agenda about carbon emissions and not being concerned about the cost to the average New Hampshire resident or renter or business who has to get energy to run their home, heat their house, run their business. And it seemed to me that the whole idea of this climate issue is really not the climate, it's to basically drive this agenda home of stopping efficient energy production so that everything becomes much more expensive, which will then make the alternate energy sources competitive, because the low price stuff, whether it's hydro or a nuclear power plant, would be offline.
You sometimes wonder about the motives in these things. Well, I agree with you there.
Well, at the end of the day, that is a tax, a regressive tax
Right.
on the poor, because the poor spend the largest percentage of their income on energy-related things. And when you start jacking or driving the price of that up, you are hurting poor people.
Well, and I think you need to recognize that lobbies come in for all sorts of issues, and a big issue up in Concord this year are bills giving owners of pets special rights, and in some cases pet rights. This actually began years ago. I, as an attorney, done a lot of divorce work, and who gets the dog is a big issue, to the point where
Who
the
gets the
court.
doghouse?
Well, actually, I grew up with a dog that slept outside in a doghouse, and I tell people that, and you would have thought we were torturing the dog when people listen to that story. The dog was quite happy. So there's actually on the court form for divorce now, there's actually a section for pets as
really?
to the division of pets. But I can tell you on the committee I sit at, we've seen a lot of bills directed at landlords and essentially forcing landlords to take pets or not be able to refuse pets or not be able to charge extra. And we've heard a lot about landlords about what that will do to their ability to provide housing at the costs they currently do. And, I'm going to ascribe the best of intentions for people coming in, wanting pets, people to have pets and be able to rent apartments who have pets. But the reality is you're talking about people who are renting. Rents are pretty expensive in this state. And if you're not, depending on what your earnings are, you're spending a big percentage of your earnings on your rent. And this will ultimately end up making it more expensive for people.
And does that contradict the stated goals of affordable housing, trying to provide lower priced housing? And wouldn't something like this go against the ability to have lower priced housing? If you're going to have, for example, I used to have my family home in Chicago. We used to rent out the back, apartment for a person who had a dog, and the person left there after about a year, and the dog just tore the place apart. We had to basically rehab that apartment.
We heard testimony about somebody who had a tenant who had a boa constrictor, and the boa constrictor got loose in the building, and they couldn't find it.
Oh, God.
And there was a family living in an apartment with young children, for whom
Wow.
it was felt were afraid to be in the apartment
Yeah.
because of the young children, and the landlord had to pay to put them up at a hotel until the boa constrictor was found.
Wow.
Well, I bought my first house from a person who left in a hurry, and I found out the story. It took them 3 days to clean the house. They had to, because the dog left presents everywhere, and they had to resurface the floors, repatch the walls, and a couple of other things from the animals. I got a good deal.
Right, and pets are lovely. I have
Yeah.
pets, but you need to be able to prioritize, be able to take care of them, and if you own property and you're renting it, you should have an ability to protect the property not only for yourself but your other tenants.
And a few years back, we passed a bill that allowed accessible dwelling units, kind of in-law apartments that could be used for short-term stay of your in-laws, or now with the ability to lock it off, really have affordable housing on a piece of property. And I just wonder, Barbara, has that anything come up in real estate in the legal aspects of that?
Well, there are lots of things going on in real estate, but I think that could be the topic of a whole nother discussion
Okay.
with the bills
I
that are
think it
going
should
forward
be.
on that,
That's right,
because
yeah.
there is indeed a lot going on in regards to housing appeals boards, planning boards, and what local zoning and planning boards are really going to be able to do in regards to planning for the communities that they're elected in.
Okay. And with that, Barbara, I think that's a good invitation to invite you back to help out with the affordable housing topic and the whole issue of housing in New Hampshire. So for Carl Seidel, Kevin Scully, Barbara Griffin, I'm Bill Ohm. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
That's a wrap.
Good.
Wow, you hit it.